welcome to another episode of Jaded with Jade Amethyst. You see a different background. I'm actually in my living room because I'm still looking for like the perfect place to do my podcast. So I'm trying different scenes. So like I said in the first episode, you're probably gonna see a couple different scenes for a while until I find something that I'm more comfortable with. So right now I am comfortable out in my living room. This is where I get the most light. I am comfortable. I have my coffee here, and we're gonna get started. So, what we're gonna talk about is trauma dumping. And I don't know if you are familiar with trauma dumping. People do it, but they don't realize they're doing it. I even trauma dumped on somebody, and it's not really a pleasant feeling when you are trauma dumped on. And I'm gonna share my story of how I trauma dumped someone and how someone trauma dumped on me. And before we get started, I'm going to share a definition of trauma dumping, and I just like typed this whole thing on my phone, so I'll be looking down on my phone. Trauma dumping refers to the act of offloading one's emotional trauma onto someone else without their consent and without considering their own boundaries and well-being. It often involves burdening another person with intense emotional experiences, frequently without offering reciprocal support or seeking appropriate professional help. This behavior can be damaging and exhausting, both for the person who is subjected to the trauma dumping and for the individual engaging in it. Trauma dumping can occur in various relationships, such as relationships, romantic partnerships, or even between family members. The person engaging in trauma may feel compelled to share their experiences and seek solace or validation, but they do so in a way that disregards the impact of the listener's emotional state. There is often an imbalance in the dynamic, with one person becoming constant recipient of the other person's traumatic stories, resulting in emotional labor that can be overwhelming. And most of it I see trauma dumping is on social media. I've seen people do it in posts where they you've been essayed, but they do it in a graphical kind of like in a scary post that you shouldn't like post something like that. Or I've seen followers do it to their favorite creators. Like, I was on TikTok one day, and one of my creators that I'm mutuals with shared a story where a couple of people sent them DMs just trauma dumping, and they were going through their own stuff themselves. And they don't realize it, or they're unaware that that person is maybe going through something. And to me, to be honest, if you are DMing your favorite creator trauma dumping, I find it inappropriate. Like, if you know that you are in need of help, and if you have significant trauma, my suggestion is to seek out professionals who do specialize in trauma. And so my job, as you know, like, I am a peer counselor for a mental health agency, and I've been for 11 years. And so how I do it is I hold room, because that's part of my job. I hold room for people to share their trauma with me as a peer counselor. But when I'm on social media, I separate and I keep up boundaries. And like one time I was doing a live, and then someone just like trauma dumped me on their about their ex and everything like that, and I was like, hey, that's great, but I just like gave suggestions. Like, I said, go on Psychology Today and look for therapists who specialize in this, because they are therapists that specialize in trauma, and they are able, they're professionals. It's their job. They have the tools to hold space for you to to listen to you and your trauma, because a lot of people don't realize it. If you trauma dump on someone, they won't be able to handle it, because it also could be damaging to the person that you are reciprocating. You're reciprocating that trauma to, and it is, and then and they don't check when if the person is okay or not, like, or they don't apologize, or they don't acknowledge, like, oh, hey, like, I just shared my trauma with somebody, and I didn't, like, acknowledge that they may be going through something as well. So I'm going to share my story on how I trauma dumped somebody, and this happened almost 2 years ago. So I was going through a horrible time. Like, I left a job that they were basically treating me like crap. I was miserable. I was just very vulnerable. And so I quit my job, and I left the mental health profession for like 7 months. And so as I was so this happened when I gave in my after I gave in my notice, because I was just like spiraling. And so this happened around the new year, and I was talking to somebody who I met on Twitter, because I was on Twitter just like messing around, just like engaging with other people. And so we're DMing each other, and we were just, and it just like, it turned into, it started turning into really spicy. We just like started talking to each other, and I just went into this whole delusional mind, thought, oh my God, I'm going to start a relationship with this guy. I was already imagining like I'm his partner. We're gonna do all this like stuff together, this couple stuff. And so I started messaging them, like insanely messaging them, and started telling them like all of my shit that happened to me, and how I went through like childhood trauma, and also I went through trauma with somebody who I worked with, and also someone who I started a project with, like all this trauma, and because they were telling me about how they were going through a separation, and they have children, and I just realized, like, saying, oh shit, I just trauma dumped on somebody who was going through their own traumatic experience. And so I erased their number. Well, before I erased their number, I apologized like profusely, and I said I didn't mean to do it. I was in a state where I was not in a good place right now, and they DM'd me back, and they said, oh, they were completely nice about it. I was so shocked they did not block me. And he said, well, yeah, we're friends. And he said, well, maybe it wasn't a good idea that I messaged you. And I was like saying, no, it's okay. We're both vulnerable. We were having a miserable time at the time, and we just like needed to seek out other resources. And we're actually still friends. I'm not on, I think it's called X now. I'm not on X as much, and they have a Slack group where if you run a business, we talk about all things business, and they have given me great advice about me starting my business. And therefore, like, like, it could have turned into much worse. And then, um, the other time that trauma was dumped onto me was a so when I was working my other I was working my last job, and and there was this, I hate to say this, but they were like a fellow therapist, and because I worked in mental health, and I did question their credentials because they went through a lot of shit, and um I was going through a lot of stuff, and every time I talked to them, it just like felt like an emotional drive-by, and they would just like tell me all this stuff, and then we were like in a group supervision, the same group supervision group where we're in a group with like we have like the same supervisor, and every time that it was their turn to speak, it was just trauma dumping, and I can see everybody in the group just either just look drained or they look pissed. And me, I was drained because one time I had to keep up a boundary because one time I just like lashed out at them because I just got done with a session with a client who went through a terrible like essay trauma prior to our my session with them, and they just troned at me, and I was just like saying, you need to get the fuck out of my face. I just got done in a session with someone who went through trauma. If you have a therapist, go talk to your therapist. But right now, get the fuck away from me. And I said it pretty bold, and they just like went off and just like in tears. And I was like saying, I don't care. I don't care. And my colleagues like saying, yeah, you did the right thing. You are processing what happened in your session, and they came uninvited to dump your trauma on you, and you just got overstimulated. And it was before the overstimulated, before I found out I had ADHD and the overstimulation meant, and I thought it was just like my PTSD. And so I didn't feel bad about yelling at them. It was just like, I think it was just like a state of overstimulation that happened. And so I'm just going to go on and like say this and what I've researched about trauma dumping. And so it is essential to recognize that trauma dumping stems from a genuine need for support and validation, because a lot of people, they don't get that validation from their support, because sometimes like a lot of people on social media or people who I've worked with, they don't have a support system, and they're just like looking for that validation. However, there are healthier and more constructive ways to address one's trauma. Seeking professional help, such as therapy or counseling, as I said earlier, seek therapy or counseling, allows for a safe and confidential space to share experiences and work through the associated emotions. Professional guidance can ensure that the healing process is facilitated in a responsible and mutually supportive manner. So I just can't stress this enough. Like, I'm so glad that I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy for 6 years because I didn't realize how significant my trauma was. And so I sought out a therapist who specialized in trauma. And then even though like I was so receptive to talk about my trauma, and I finally warmed up to it, and I finally did talk about my traumas, and excuse me, And and then I just like started doing the work. And a lot of, and I might talk about this in a later podcast, that a lot of there are some people who think that therapy is a quick fix, and I know a lot of people go through multiple therapists, and being in this field for so long, sometimes like I don't blame them, because there are therapists are pretty lousy, and it's kind of rare that you find someone that's really good. And I'm lucky that I found someone that was really good, because I had numerous therapists that whenever I talk about my trauma, they would dismiss me, or they would just like talk down to me, and in sort of a way like blame me for the trauma happening. And it's just like, that's not good care, so it like traumatized me even more. And so um and so it is so important like to do the work, because if you do the work, then the more work that you do, the less like trauma dumping you're gonna do on somebody else. And and go back to watch my last like episode, like how to do self-care for the holidays, and I will be talking more about self-care in future episodes, because even though like I did it for the holidays, but it's also good like all year round. And so for those who are for those who realize they may be prone to trauma dumping self-reflection, which is crucial. Developing self-awareness is regarding that one's emotional needs and the impact that offers is a significant first step. And a lot of people who do trauma dump, they're not self-aware, especially and also in relationships too, because I did have an ex. I was with an ex for 10 years, and I did trauma dump on him, and it just like led to a toxic relationship that it just became like a codependent, which was also like traumatic in itself. And so when I ended it, like we're friends, but it was just like I didn't need to be in a relationship right now. I needed to do the work. I needed to heal. I needed to face my trauma. And so like I'm still single. I'm still doing the work on the trauma, but like especially like there are some people who treat their partners as their therapists, even though that they're going through their own thing, and like they're not aware, like it's not reciprocated, like it's not the support isn't given back, which I have done, and there are people who have done. If you have done that, or if you witness people doing that, feel free to leave your comments below. And so as so yeah, definitely like self-awareness. Another thing is like also self-reflection, like emotional needs and the impact of others significant the first step. Exploring alternative outlets for processing trauma, such as journaling, creative expressions, or support groups, can provide a healthier release valve. Building strong support network that includes people who are able and willing to provide support while still maintaining their own emotional boundaries is also important. And when I started like facing my trauma, I started I don't know, my throat is so dry. Hold on. I started facing when I started facing my trauma, I just started journaling, and I just like started writing out on how I felt, and the more I wrote it out, the more better I felt. Like it just like felt freeing. It felt that I am letting this trauma go, because just like having it carry with me, the trauma will still live in you. Unfortunately, will still live within you, but you can um so you can release it by writing, journaling. I do coloring books. I started doing coloring books like a few years ago, and I actually love doing coloring books because it gets the stress away, and also your mind is in a different state. Your mind is it's kind of like you're reaching your inner child in a way, and so I started doing coloring books, and um, so if you find yourself in a situation where someone encouraged you in trauma dumping, it is crucial to prioritize your well-being. Please, if someone tries to trauma dump you, please keep your well-being in mind and keep up boundaries. Boundaries is so important. I didn't know how to put up boundaries until I went to therapy, and now I put up boundaries, and I actually feel empowered putting up boundaries. Communicating your limits can be an empowering step. You have the right to say no and to protect your emotional health. Encouraging the person to seek professional help can also be beneficial, as it redirects them towards appropriate avenues for processing and healing. And unfortunately, like, people are going to be receptive to that, because what they see in the media and society, they think that therapy, it means like you are very delusional, and or you're delusional, or you are a poor little rich kid whose mommy and daddy did not pay attention to you enough, and which is not true. And like, I grew up poor, single family home, and I work in nonprofit, don't make a lot of money, but I'm in therapy. And so before we go, I'm going to say this last thing. So trauma dumping is a harmful behavior that disregards the boundaries and well-being of others. It places an unfair burden on individuals who may not consent or be adequately equipped to handle intense emotional experiences. Recognizing the need for support and validation is important, but seeking more appropriate outlets such as therapy is essential for growth, for maintenance, and healthy relationships. For both engage in trauma and those who experience it, developing self-awareness and establishing mutual boundaries are key steps to fostering healthier and more supportive connections. And yes, that is true. Like once like you seek professionals who specialize in trauma and and releasing it, it can have better connections. Like, me and my sister, like, we did not get along in for the longest time. Like, we would fight all the time, like, to the point we would have physical altercations, and then we would outburst in public, and it was just like really embarrassing. And so once we both sought out like treatment, we started communicating better, and we haven't had a physical altercation like in years. So therapy is beneficial, and because before we started doing therapy, our language was just like yelling and screaming. That's all we did, was yelling and screaming, because we grew up in a house where, like, we were raised by our grandmother, and I don't remember her even saying like a soft word. She was always yelling and screaming. And so and we picked up on that, just like yelling and screaming, and it just like led to burning bridges, like really toxic friendships. And so just like facing my trauma, it just led me to just maintain my emotional regulation. And so with that being said, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I'm still getting the hang of this podcast thing. I'm still, my words still jumble around, but the more I do it, the more I get comfortable with it. So, again, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at the Jade Amethyst. I'm going to have a workshop that is coming soon.
Jaded, and follow me on Instagram and TikTok. They're both at the Jade Amethyst, and check out my blog at www.thejadeamethyst.com.